The last thing Elena Marchetti expected on a Tuesday night was a bag over her head. 1 second she was locking up her father's flower shop, keys jingling, humming some pop song under her breath. The next, a hand, huge, warm, terrifyingly gentle, clamped over her mouth, and the world went black inside a canvas hood. She didn't scream. She couldn't. All she could do was feel the stranger lift her off her feet like she weighed nothing at all and hear him murmur, low and rough against her ear.
Don't fight me, tesoro. I don't want to hurt you. I never want to hurt you.
Her heart slammed against her ribs the entire ride, the hood pressed damp against her lips with every ragged breath. She counted turns, memorized the texture of the seat under her hands, anything that might matter later. When the car finally stopped and rough hands guided her up a flight of stairs, her knees nearly buckled. Damien Voss did not enjoy this part of the job. He stood in the dim light of his study on the top floor of a converted warehouse near the docks, turning a heavy glass of scotch in his hand, listening to Marco recount, for the third time, exactly how much Antonio Marchetti owed him. $200,000. 6 months overdue. A man who had sworn on his daughter's life he'd have it by Friday, and then simply hadn't. There was a version of Damien, once, who wanted something entirely different out of life. A boy who sketched buildings in the margins of his school notebooks, who thought he might get out of the family business and build things instead of collecting on other men's ruin. That boy had died the night his father was gunned down in a restaurant parking lot, 13 years old, and understanding for the first time that in this life, softness got people killed. He had spent every year since building a version of himself that couldn't be hurt that way again. No attachments. No weaknesses.
I'll go myself,
Damien said, when Marco offered to send men instead, surprising them both. He told himself it was simply thoroughness. When he pulled the hood off her head at the safe house, he always did that part personally, refusing to let his men see a frightened woman's face before he did. He expected tears. Screaming. Instead, he found a pair of wide brown eyes blinking up at him, chest heaving, dark hair mussed over her shoulder, chin lifted like she still had some say in what happened next.
If you're going to kill me,
she said, voice shaking but clear,
at least tell me your name first. I'd like to know who to haunt.
Damien actually laughed. A short, disbelieving huff of breath, because nobody made jokes at him.
Damien,
he said.
And I'm not going to kill you.
Then what exactly is this? Wine tasting? Book club?
Your father owes me money.
Something in her face crumpled. Not fear for herself, he realized, but worry for someone else entirely.
How much?
She said quietly.
200,000.
She closed her eyes.
He told me he'd stopped gambling. 2 years ago, he told me he'd stopped.
When she opened her eyes again, they were wet, but her voice was steady.
Hurting me won't get you your money. I sell flowers for a living. I make enough to keep the lights on above the shop, and that's it.
He crouched down in front of her so they were eye level, something in his chest cracking open like ice on a warm day.
What's your name?
Elena.
Elena,
he repeated, testing the shape of it in his mouth.
Nobody is going to hurt you. You have my word.
Your word. From the man who kidnapped me.
Yes,
Damien said simply.
From that man.
And even though every rational part of her screamed that this was insanity, something in the way he said it made Elena believe him. At least enough to breathe again. She didn't understand that first week why he came by so often. She told herself it was ordinary caution, a captor checking on his collateral, making sure she hadn't found a way to slip a window or slit her wrists out of despair. It didn't occur to her, not once, that a man like Damien Voss might simply want an excuse to be in the same room as her. She was too busy being frightened, too busy missing her father and her shop and the version of her life that had existed 2 weeks ago to notice the particular way his shoulders relaxed the second he stepped through her door, or how long he lingered afterward for no reason at all. There was a night early on when she woke from a nightmare, some formless, panicked thing about the hood and the car and never seeing her father again, and found herself crying quietly in the dark before she'd even fully surfaced from sleep. She didn't call out. She didn't think anyone could hear her through the walls of that old building. But Damien was standing in her doorway within a minute, hair mussed like he'd been asleep himself, expression stricken in a way she was too disoriented to properly notice.
I heard you,
he said simply, crossing the room before she could tell him not to, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed like he wasn't sure he was allowed closer.
Do you want me to leave?
She should have said yes. Instead, she shook her head, and he stayed, awkward and silent at first, until she finally admitted, in a small voice that embarrassed her, that she was scared she'd never see her father again. Scared of what her life had become. Scared of him, too, if she was honest. He didn't defend himself. He simply said,
I know I gave you every reason to be scared of me. I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving I don't want to be that reason anymore.
And something about the quiet steadiness of it let her fall back asleep faster than she expected. His presence at the edge of the bed, the last thing she registered before sleep took her under. She didn't think much of it in the morning. She filed it away, like everything else, as simply who he was. An unexpectedly decent man doing an indecent job. Nothing more complicated than that. She had no framework yet for the alternative. That Damien had sat there long after she fell asleep, watching her breathe, feeling something in his chest come dangerously, irreversibly undone. He brought her food himself most nights instead of sending it up with one of his men, and told himself it was courtesy. He noticed, with an attention to detail he usually reserved for supply routes and rival territories, that she liked her coffee with too much sugar and barely any milk. That she hummed the same 3 bars of a pop song under her breath whenever she was nervous. That she chewed the inside of her cheek when she was working up the nerve to ask him something. None of it seemed strange to him until the night he realized he'd been standing in the hallway outside her door for 11 minutes, simply listening to her move around the room, and had absolutely no memory of deciding to stop there at all.
You're doing it again,
Marco told him one evening, not looking up from the ledger he was balancing.
Doing what?
Finding reasons to walk past her door 4 times a night instead of once.
Marco glanced up then, something wary in his expression.
I've known you 17 years, Damien. I've never once seen you like this.
Like what?
Damien said, sharper than he meant to.
Distracted.
Marco said simply.
Careful. Like there's something in this building you're actually afraid of losing.
Damien didn't answer that, because he didn't have an answer that didn't terrify him more than any rival ever had. It got worse, or better, depending on which of them you asked, the longer she stayed. He started finding reasons to bring his paperwork to the kitchen table instead of his study, just to have her nearby while he worked, some part of him settling the moment she was within sight, even if neither of them said a word for an hour. He began noticing, with something close to obsession, the exact rhythm of her footsteps on the floor above his room at night, cataloging when she was awake and restless versus when she'd finally drifted off, as if some part of him needed to know she was safe before he could allow himself to sleep either. He thought about her constantly during the day, in the middle of meetings that used to hold his full attention, catching himself wondering what she was doing at that exact moment, whether she was cooking, whether she was staring out the window missing her old life, whether she ever thought about him the way he couldn't stop thinking about her. It reached a point, a few weeks in, where Damien genuinely frightened himself with the scale of it. He found himself standing outside her door some nights, with no excuse prepared at all, simply wanting to be near the sound of her breathing, and would catch himself there, hand raised to knock on nothing, and force himself back down the hallway, feeling like a man losing some private war against his own mind. He started rearranging his schedule around her without consciously deciding to, moving meetings earlier so he'd be back before she went to sleep, sending Marco to handle disputes he would once have handled personally, simply so he wouldn't have to be away from that building for more than a few hours at a time. He told himself, every single time, that it was still only caution. He was, by then, the only person in the building who still believed that. Elena, for her part, remained blissfully unaware of the particular shape of what was happening to him. She noticed he was kind, kinder than she expected, kinder than made any sense for a man in his line of work, and she filed that kindness away as simply who he was, a strange, careful exception in an otherwise frightening world, rather than anything aimed specifically at her. When he learned her coffee order without being told twice, she thought he was simply observant. When he brought her books because she'd mentioned missing reading before bed, she thought he was simply decent, in the narrow, surprising way some dangerous men could occasionally be decent. It never once crossed her mind that Damien Voss, feared through half the city, might be lying awake at night with her face behind his eyes, might be unraveling thread by thread over a woman he was supposed to be holding for ransom. By the second week she'd charmed Marco into teaching her poker and won $40 off him, she refused to let him live down. By the third, she was cooking real meals for the whole crew instead of the sad microwave dinners they usually survived on, humming while she worked, and Damien took to lingering in doorways just to watch her laugh at something one of his men said, feeling like a stranger in his own life, like the version of himself that existed before all of this had been slowly, quietly, replaced by someone who wanted, more than he had wanted anything in a decade, to come home to the sound of her voice.
"You're not like I imagined a man in your position would be,"
she told him one night, the two of them alone at the table long after his men had gone to bed, an unfinished bottle of wine between them.
What did you imagine?
"Cold. Cruel for the sake of it. You're not cruel. You're careful. There's a difference."
Careful didn't stop me from taking you out of your life at gunpoint,
Damien said quietly, and it was the first time she heard real guilt in his voice. Unguarded.
"No,"
she agreed.
"But careful is why I'm not afraid of you anymore."
She meant it as reassurance. She had no idea what it did to him to hear it, how a single sentence from her mouth could undo weeks of careful discipline, how he had to grip the edge of the table to keep from reaching for her right then. He said nothing. He simply looked at her too long, and she noticed that, at least, though she mistook the intensity in his eyes for something closer to exhaustion than desire. It was a woman named Sophia who finally, unknowingly, forced the truth into the open. Sophia, beautiful, sharp-tongued, clearly familiar with Damien's world in a way Elena wasn't, came by one evening on business, some supplier negotiation gone sideways, and looked at Elena the whole meeting like she was a stray animal Damien had foolishly decided to keep.
"Careful with this one, Tesoro,"
Sophia said on her way out, hand lingering a beat too long on his arm.
"You used to have better taste."
Elena said nothing. She cleared the dinner plates, went to bed early, and lay awake furious at herself for the ugly, unfamiliar twist of jealousy in her chest. Furious because she still didn't have a name for what she felt for him, and somehow that made it worse, not better, to watch another woman touch him like it was nothing new. Damien noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her by then. He knocked on her door an hour later, hovering in the frame like he wasn't sure he was welcome.
You've been avoiding me,
he said.
"I've been minding my business, which is difficult considering I'm living in your business."
Sophia doesn't mean anything to me.
"You don't have to explain anything to me, Damien. I'm your collateral, remember? Not your girlfriend."
The words came out sharper than she meant, and she watched something flicker across his face. Actual hurt, quickly buried.
Is that what you think you are to me? Collateral.
I don't know what I am to you.
Elena admitted, voice cracking.
That's the problem.
Damien crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands in his, forcing her to look at him.
There has been no one,
He said, low and fierce.
since the night I pulled that hood off your face and saw you looking back at me like you still had teeth. You are the only thing in 8 years that has made me want to be a different man. I think about you constantly, Elena. I think about you so often it frightens me. Do you understand the difference between that and collateral?
Her breath caught. She had spent 3 weeks explaining away every kindness, every lingering look, every excuse he found to be near her. And here it was, finally, stated plainly, with nowhere left to hide from it.
That's not fair to say to me while I'm still angry.
She managed.
I know.
Damien said, the ghost of a smile breaking through.
I'm hoping it works anyway.
It didn't end the conversation so much as it changed its shape entirely. Something had cracked open between them that night that neither seemed willing, yet, to close back up. A current that hummed under every following interaction, every accidental brush of hands in the kitchen, every glance held a beat too long. Elena caught herself, more than once, watching the door for him the way she used to watch it in dread. Found herself disappointed on the nights he was too busy to bring her dinner himself. She told herself it was only natural, after weeks of proximity, to feel something. She still hadn't let herself call it what it was. It came to a head on an ordinary evening, steam curling off a pot of sauce on the stove, Elena stirring absently while Damien leaned against the counter pretending to read something on his phone and actually watching her the entire time.
You're not letting me go because you actually collected the debt,
she said suddenly, setting down the spoon.
Are you?
No.
Damien admitted.
Then why am I still here?
He should have lied. He had lied for a living for a decade. Instead, he crossed the kitchen, close enough that she had to tip her head back to hold his gaze, and told her the truth.
Because the thought of you walking out that door and never seeing you again makes something in my chest feel like it's collapsing. Because I have spent every night for 3 weeks lying awake listening for your footsteps like a man losing his mind. I have never once in my life said something this honest to anyone.
Elena's breath caught. The air between them went thick and electric, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses in on your skin.
That's insane,
she whispered.
You kidnapped me.
I know.
You're a criminal. You're everything I should run from.
I know that too.
His hand came up, slow enough that she could have stopped him, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face.
Tell me to stop, Elena. I have never wanted anything the way I want to kiss you right now, and I will still walk away if you ask me to.
She didn't tell him to stop. For the first time since the hood came off her head, she understood exactly what she felt, and it terrified her far less than she expected. She rose up on her toes and closed the last inch of distance between them herself. The kiss started soft, almost unbearably gentle for a man with his reputation, his hand cradling her jaw like she might shatter, his mouth moving against hers, slow and reverent, like he was memorizing the shape of her lips after weeks of only imagining it. Elena melted into it, fingers curling into the front of his shirt, and when she made a small, helpless sound against his mouth, something in Damien broke loose entirely. He pulled her flush against him, one arm banding around her waist, and the kiss turned deeper, hungrier, the two of them stumbling back until she was pressed against the counter and he was caging her in with his body. His tongue traced her bottom lip, and she opened for him with a soft gasp, and the kitchen, the whole safe house, the whole world outside that room, simply ceased to exist.
Damien,
She breathed, when they finally broke apart for air, lips swollen, cheeks flushed.
this is insane. This is so insane.
Say the word and I stop.
He rasped, forehead resting against hers.
Say it and I let you go tonight. Debt forgiven and you never have to see me again.
Her hands were still fisted in his shirt.
Don't you dare stop.
She whispered. That was all the permission he needed. He kissed her again, harder this time, walking her backward down the hall, mouths never quite parting, hands mapping every curve of her like a man finally allowed to touch something he'd spent weeks only watching. At his bedroom door, he paused, just to look at her, flushed and beautiful in the low light. Something so tender crossing his face it nearly undid her.
Tell me you want this.
He said.
I need to hear you say it.
I want this.
Elena said, and pulled him through the door by his shirt collar.
I want you.
What followed was slow and hot and reverent. Damien undressing her like he was unwrapping something sacred, pressing kisses to every inch of skin he uncovered, murmuring against her throat, her collarbone, the curve of her hip, how long he'd wanted her, how he couldn't believe she was real, how he'd rehearsed this in his head so many nights he'd half convinced himself it would never actually happen. Elena arched into every touch, breathless, fingers tangled in his dark hair, whispering his name like a prayer. Their bodies moved together like they've been waiting for each other for weeks without either of them admitting it. Desperate and tender all at once, gasping each other's names into the dark, the outside world entirely forgotten until the first gray light of dawn found them tangled together, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder.
Stay.
Damien murmured into her hair.
Not because of the debt. Stay because I am asking you to.
Elena pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart.
Ask me properly sometime. When I'm not still your prisoner.
He tipped her chin up, seriousness startling her.
You were never my prisoner, Elena. Not after that first night. You've been my prisoner's opposite. The only free thing in my entire life.
She woke first, some mornings later, to sunlight cutting gold stripes across the sheets and Damien's arm heavy and warm around her waist. For a long moment, she just lay there, cataloging the strangeness of it. How a room that had once felt like a cage now felt like the safest place she'd ever been. How the man beside her, who terrified half the city, slept with his face soft and unguarded, years younger looking than he ever allowed himself to look awake.
You're staring.
He murmured without opening his eyes.
You're pretty when you're unconscious. Much less scary.
I'll take pretty.
He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her shoulder, then her neck, then just below her ear, his voice rough with sleep and want.
5 more minutes.
You have an empire to run, Mr. Voss.
The Empire can wait.
His hand slid slow along her hip, drawing her back against him, and whatever protest she might have made dissolved into a soft gasp instead.
You cannot possibly expect me to get out of this bed when you're looking at me like that.
Like what?
Like you might actually want me to stay too.
She turned in his arms to face him properly, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips.
I might,
she admitted. And that was answer enough. He kissed her slow and unhurried this time, no urgency in it at all. Just the lazy luxury of two people who finally had nowhere else they needed to be, hands mapping familiar territory now, whispered laughter breaking the kisses when his stubble tickled her collarbone or her cold feet found his calves under the blanket. It built anyway. Unhurried heat spreading warm through both of them until neither was laughing anymore, until his name became the only word she had left, until the morning light climbed halfway up the wall before either of them managed to speak in full sentences again. Afterward, tangled together and breathless, Damien traced idle patterns on her bare back.
I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was a fever dream. That there's no version of my life where someone like you ends up in my bed, looking at me like I'm not a monster.
You're not a monster.
Elena said, propping herself up on one elbow.
You're a man who did difficult things because the world handed him a difficult life and never showed him another way to survive it. That's different.
Careful,
Damien said, something raw flickering across his face.
Keep talking like that and I'll never let you leave this bed.
Good,
she said, and kissed him again to prove it. There were other mornings like that one, and other nights that had nothing to do with the danger of his world at all. Just two people, slowly, helplessly learning each other. He found out she couldn't sleep without a sliver of light somewhere in the room, a habit left over from childhood nights waiting up for a father who didn't come home. She found out he hummed under his breath when he thought no one was listening. Some old lullaby in a language she didn't recognize, and when she asked about it, he went quiet before admitting it was the only thing he remembered his mother singing before she left for good when he was 6. She started leaving little things around the safe house that made it feel less like a fortress. A jar of wildflowers on the windowsill, a mismatched mug with a chip in the handle that became, without either of them deciding it, hers and only hers. She caught him once running his thumb along the rim of that chipped mug, with an expression so unguarded it nearly stopped her heart.
You don't have to pretend you don't like it,
she told him, amused.
I like all of it,
he admitted.
I like it so much it terrifies me. Now there's a coffee mug I'd burn the building down to protect, and it isn't even about the mug.
It's never about the mug,
Elena said softly, stepping into the space between his knees, tilting his face up to hers.
It's about who leaves it there every morning.
One evening he came home with a single sunflower, absurdly oversized and slightly crushed from the car ride, and held it out to her with the awkward, unpracticed formality of a man who had never given anyone flowers in his life.
I know you sell them for a living,
he said.
This is probably insulting.
It's the best flower I've ever been given,
Elena said, laughing even as her eyes went bright. There was an afternoon, too, when she finally let herself cry properly for the first time since the night she'd been taken, overwhelmed all at once by how strange and impossible her whole life had become. Damien didn't try to fix it. He simply sat beside her, close enough that she could lean into him if she wanted to, and waited.
I don't even know who I am anymore,
she admitted, voice thick.
Weeks ago, I had a normal life. Now I'm in love with a man who kidnapped me, and I don't know if that makes me insane or the luckiest woman alive.
Maybe it's allowed to be both,
Damien said quietly, pulling her into his side, his hand smoothing over her hair.
I can't give you back the life you had. I can only promise the one ahead of us will be worth what it cost to get here.
That's a big promise.
I'm a man who keeps his promises,
Damien said.
Ask anyone who's ever crossed me.
She laughed wetly despite herself, and by the time the afternoon light slanted gold through the windows, she was asleep against him, and he simply held her there for hours rather than risk waking her, thinking that whatever else his life had cost him, this single ordinary afternoon had made all of it worthwhile. There was another evening when she talked him, genuinely talked him, over his half-hearted protests, into dancing with her in the kitchen to a song crackling tinny out of an old radio, her bare feet on top of his shoes, the way she said her father used to do with her mother when she was small.
I don't dance,
Damien said, even as he let her pull his arms around her waist.
You're doing it right now.
Under duress.
Higher,
she said, grinning up at him, and he found he couldn't argue with that either. swaying slow and a little clumsy in that small kitchen, her laughter warm against his collarbone. The song changed to something slower, and so did the way they moved, less dancing now than simply standing wrapped around each other, her cheek against his chest, his hand splayed warm against the small of her back. When she tilted her face up to look at him, whatever had been playful in the moment shifted into something heavier, something that had been building under the surface of every touch for weeks.
Damien,
She murmured, and he could hear everything she wasn't saying in the way she said his name. He kissed her slow, one hand cradling the back of her head, walking her backward without breaking the kiss until her back met the wall, and she gasped softly at the contact, fingers fisting in his shirt to pull him closer rather than push him away. His mouth moved from her lips to her jaw to the sensitive skin below her ear, and she arched into him, breath catching, murmuring his name again like it was the only word she had left. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist, and carried her from the kitchen without either of them acknowledging aloud that the dancing had been forgotten entirely. What followed, that night, was unhurried in a way their first time together hadn't been. No desperation left in it, just two people who had learned every one of each other's soft spots and intended to use that knowledge thoroughly. He took his time undoing every button of her shirt like he had all night to do it, which he did, murmuring against her skin with every inch he uncovered, delighting in the small sounds she made when his mouth found the places that made her breath catch hardest. She pushed back just as unhurried, learning him in return, until neither of them could remember who was supposed to be in charge of slowing anything down. When they finally came together, it was with a kind of quiet reverence that felt almost more intimate than the heat of it. Foreheads pressed together, eyes open, watching each other the entire time like neither wanted to miss a second of it. Afterward, tangled in the sheets with her head on his chest, he told her, mouth against her hair, that he had never in his life felt less like a man people feared, and more like simply, entirely, hopelessly hers. There was, eventually, a complication neither of them could avoid forever. Word travels fast in Damien's world, and a rival named Rico Salvatore had heard a rumor that the untouchable Damien Voss had gone soft over some flower shop's daughter. It worried Damien more than he let on, and for a handful of tense days he weighed sending her somewhere far away for her own safety. When he tried to tell her so, Elena crossed her arms and planted her feet.
absolutely not. You don't get to fall in love with me and then send me away the second things get complicated. Free things don't get locked away for safekeeping. Free things choose. And I am choosing to stay.
He crossed the kitchen and kissed her like he was trying to memorize her.
If anything happened to you, I don't survive it.
Then don't let anything happen to me. Let me stand beside you instead of behind you.
In the end, the danger passed quieter than either of them feared. Marco and a handful of Damien's men handled Rico's posturing with enough quiet pressure that the threat folded within days without a shot fired, and Rico backed down for good. What mattered far more was the night before it resolved, when neither of them could sleep, and they lay tangled together in the dark instead. Elena's cheek against Damien's chest, listening to his heartbeat like it was the only steady thing left in the world.
Tell me something good.
She whispered.
About after.
After.
Damien said finally, fingers combing slowly through her hair.
I want a house that isn't a fortress, somewhere with a garden you can ruin with too many flowers. I want to wake up every morning without wondering if it's the day someone comes to collect on all the things I've done. I want to marry you,
he added quietly.
Not tonight. Someday, when I've earned the right to ask you properly. On my knees. Like a man who deserves you instead of one who stole you.
Ask me again when things are calmer,
Elena said, throat tight.
I want to remember saying yes without any of this hanging over us.
He showed her instead of answering. Slow and unhurried, Nothing left to prove. Just two people choosing each other in the dark. Antonio Marchetti's debt, in the end, became the least important detail of the entire story. Damien forgave it outright one quiet morning. Sitting across from Antonio in a corner diner booth, Elena's hand tight around his under the table.
I don't want your money.
Damien told the older man.
I want your blessing. I'm in love with your daughter, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure nothing and no one ever threatens her again. Including, if I'm honest, men like the man I used to be.
Antonio looked between them for a long moment. At his daughter's radiant, hopeful face. At the careful man holding her hand like it was the only tether keeping him steady. And finally let out a long breath.
She looks happier than I've seen her look in years. God help me. You have my blessing. Just don't ever let her get hurt because of who you are.
Never again,
Damien said, and meant it with everything in him. Life, in the months that followed, looked almost unrecognizable from the night it began. Damien stepped back, slowly, from the parts of his world that used to keep him up at night, tightening his circle to people he actually trusted, and for the first time since he was a teenager, slept through the night without a gun within arm's reach. Elena liked to joke that she'd domesticated the most dangerous man in the city, with nothing but pasta and stubbornness, and Damien never once argued the point, because it was, more or less, entirely true. They found a house eventually. Nothing that looked like a fortress, just wide windows and a yard big enough for the garden Elena immediately filled with more flowers than either of them knew what to do with. He learned to garden badly and enthusiastically beside her, dirt under his nails instead of the careful control he used to maintain, and she teased him mercilessly for measuring the spacing between tulip bulbs with an actual ruler.
Everything worth doing is worth doing properly,
he said, entirely serious, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down in the dirt, and he abandoned the ruler just to kiss her, both of them muddy and grinning, and it struck her then how completely, quietly happy they had both become. How a story that started with a hood over her head had somehow become the gentlest chapter of both their lives. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of the flower shop, now hers outright. Damien had quietly paid off the lease without telling her. Love expressed in acts rather than declarations, arranging a fresh delivery of peonies when strong arms slid around her from behind.
I still remember the first time I saw you,
Damien said, chin resting on her shoulder.
Bag over your head, scared out of your mind, and you still had the nerve to ask my name so you'd know who to haunt.
Elena laughed, leaning back into him.
And instead, I ended up haunting your kitchen, your bed, your entire life.
Best kidnapping I ever botched,
Damien said, and turned her gently in his arms to kiss her, slow and warm, right there in the golden afternoon light of the shop that smelled like roses and second chances.
I love you,
He whispered against her lips.
Every unexpected piece of how we started, I would do it all again if it led back here. To you.
I love you too.
Elena whispered back.
Debt collector? Kidnapper? My husband, soon enough, if you ever get around to asking properly.
Damien pulled back just far enough to look at her, something soft and a little nervous crossing his features. And then he was reaching into his jacket pocket, dropping slowly to one knee among the flowers she loved so much.
Elena Marchetti,
he said, voice rough with emotion.
You walked into my life in the worst possible way, and you turned it into the only good thing I have ever had. Marry me. Let me spend the rest of my life making up for how we started.
She was already crying and already nodding before he finished the sentence, pulling him up by the lapels to kiss him, the ring forgotten between them for one long, perfect moment, before she finally let him slide it onto her finger. Outside, the city went on the way it always did, indifferent, unaware that somewhere in a small flower shop, A debt that started in fear had been paid. In full. In love.